Okay, guys, this is going to be my first video in a probably 3 or 4 part series for the newcomer to Linux from probably Windows, talking about converting from Windows to Linux. I'm making this video specifically because in the Linux groups, the Linux forums, the same question gets asked multiple times a day. Somewhere in the context of, I'm sick of Windows, I'm ready to switch to Linux. What is the best Linux? Or what is the best Linux distro? And the correct answer to that question is there isn't one. There is no best Linux distro. Simultaneously, the other correct answer is the distro you like the best is the best distro for you. You being a new user to Linux or a newcomer to Linux, you've never used Linux before, so you're going into those groups and those forums asking Linux users, what is the best Linux? Or what is the best distro? Invariably, the replies that come out of that are Arch, Gentoo, Kubuntu, KDE Neon, Shutter, Monjero, and I'll give a moment for some of you to shudder. Ubuntu, Lubuntu, Xubuntu, Kubuntu, Linux Mint, and the list goes on and on. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, OpenSUSE Leap, etc., etc. Those replies are simultaneously incorrect and correct at the same time. Those people that are answering with those distros as their answer are saying that those distros for them are the best ones for them. And that is correct. But for the new user, maybe not. So I'm going to try my best to answer that question in this video and the next couple of videos. And right here on screen, I'm going to attempt to make a flowchart explaining my point of view. And I'll post that flowchart on my website, lowtechlinux.com. It'll be there someday, hopefully in the next day or two. So I am going to attempt to make a flowchart right here on the screen. Fire up the old faithful Inkscape. Gotten to know this Inkscape pretty good. I'm going to change my document. I think I'm going to change it to let's see. Let's change it to, we are in inches, so I'm going to go, let's go 11 by 8. Make it somewhat PDF-like. Okay, so we're going to make a flowchart. And I'm going to start out with best Linux. Sure. And this is specifically for the new user. All right, best Linux. Now, the first question you have to ask is, number one, do you want it to be easy or do you want it to be hard? And when I say hard, I mean get your hands dirty. You're learning things about Linux before you maybe even boot for the first time. The hard is, let's go with cured hard. And after hard, we're going to have hard, we're going to say Linux from scratch, so LFS, Linux from scratch, and say Gentoo. Those two are going to be doing it hard, learning as you go. So let's make an arrow. I'm going to make an arrow here. Sure, that works. Make it a little darker. Okay. So, best Linux. Do you want it to be hard? Then go with Linux from scratch or Gentoo. Do you want it to be easy? So, down here, let's go easy. Sure, we'll change colors. That's fine. Okay, so the next thing to ask is, let's move this over. If we go with easy, the next question is secure boot. And the reason I bring up secure boot is if you're coming from Windows 10 and Shutter Windows 11, you probably have secure boot enabled on your system already because Windows 11 requires it, Windows 10 somewhat requires it. So you probably already have it enabled. So let's make secure boot. And the reason I bring this up is, so any Linux out there is capable of booting with secure boot, but only a small handful of them have it enabled by default. Ubuntu and all of the Ubuntu derivatives have it enabled by default. OpenSUSE and all of OpenSUSE products, Tumbleweed, Leap, MicroOS, etc. All of those have secure boot enabled by default. Fedora. I feel like I'm missing one. Debian, I think, does. I can't think of any more off the top of my head. I'm sure I'm missing one. But secure boot by default is going to be easier for the brand new user to not have to figure it out on their own. And sometimes the brand new user doesn't feel comfortable going into those UEFI boot settings and making any changes in there because you could potentially turn your computer into a paperweight if you do the wrong thing. It's not likely, but it could. So some people are not comfortable with that. So I'm going to recommend brand new user use something secure boot is automatically enabled by default. So we really narrowed down what we're going to suggest just by adding that parameter into this flowchart. I'm going to try to neaten this flowchart up before I publish it, but you kind of get the idea of where I'm going with it. So easy, secure boot. Let's go with, let's do this. All right, easy, secure boot. And we'll add yes, and we'll add no. Okay. So, yes. Next, we'll add yes here. And we'll say no here. And then when we do the no, we'll just say other. So secure boot yes is these handful, and secure boot no is you can pick anything. If you already have secure boot turned off, or you're comfortable with turning secure boot off, you can run just about any Linux out there. So no, we're going to say other. And other gets you into anything Arch derivative, Manjaro, Endeavor OS, basically anything out there. And I want to say PC Linux OS, I'm pretty sure will boot secure boot by default. So yes is everything that I'm going to suggest. Let's spin that around. We'll grab both of those. Secure boot. Yes. Okay, so now the question is, what do you need it for? What are you looking to get out of it? Are you needing something that's super stable? You're doing data entry, you're making a data server, you're making a server you can put in your closet. You want something that doesn't change very much at all, almost ever. And you're needing it to be just absolutely unchanging stable. So if that's the case, then you're going to do something LTS, point release. You're looking at an Ubuntu LTS. You're looking at OpenSUSE Leap. You're also looking at maybe an immutable. Explain about that shortly. OpenSUSE Micro OS and Fedora. I think it's Silverblue. I think. Is that right? Let me check myself. Mutable Silverblue. Yeah, I was right. Okay, so you're looking at those, the immutables. I'm not a big fan of the immutables as they stand right now. They don't do what I need them to do. They don't work the way that I need them to work. They have a lot of good things going for them. So just, you can look at that on your own. I'm not going to mention them too much other than I just did. Okay. So stable, the server, the data entry, maybe you're programming and you don't want your program to change much, you're going to go with an LTS type. So OpenSUSE, Leap, or an Ubuntu derivative LTS, which is it is supported for 5 years or 6 years, depending on which derivative you take. I think that some of the derivatives are only good for 3 years. Ubuntu proper is 5 years, I think. Leap, I believe, is 2 years. So you get the idea. Fedora's a combination of a rolling release and a fixed release. They do have an upgrade. They do have an upgrade system that they do. I think it's once every year. And some of their packages are rolling based. I'm not sure how Fedora works. I'm not a fan. But by all means, try Fedora. You may love it. There's a lot of people out there who think it's the best Linux. So give it a shot. I'm not telling you to not use something I don't like. Just because I'm not a big fan of it, I'm not saying don't use it. Try it. Try everything out there. Okay, so the LTS, let's go ahead and put this as oops, wrong button. LTS stable. So we're looking at either an LTS stable, or are you looking for something that has a more bleeding edge approach? Rolling release is what we call it. When a package gets updated, it gets put on the server as, hey, I have this new update. A lot of the rolling releases will go ahead and pull those in, and some rolling release models test it out before they send it to you, and some rolling release models just say, here you are, have at it. So that's the best way to get the brand new Vulkan driver for your graphics, Mesa stack for also your graphics, Wine, Proton, all of your gaming centric needs. So if you're looking for something where you want to game, your primary focus in having Linux is for gaming, then and I'll talk more about that also in just a minute. But if your primary focus is gaming, then you're really looking for something rolling release, because it gets the latest and greatest of all the goodies first. So we're going to put another category here: rolling release. So you have your LTS model and you have your rolling release. So you have to pick between these two. So I'm going to separate these out just a little bit for a reason. Show you shortly. Okay, so LTS stable. Let's go ahead and put Ubuntu. Asterisk. The reason I'm doing the asterisk is for derivatives. And what that means is you can do Ubuntu. Let's change the color a little bit. Okay, that'll work. You can do derivatives of Ubuntu, and I'm classifying all of those derivatives as this Ubuntu. That's why I'm putting asterisk. Kubuntu, Lubuntu, Ubuntu Mate, Ubuntu GNOME, any of the Ubuntus. And the basic difference between any of those is the desktop environment or the DE desktop environment. My next video, I'm going to go into a lot of detail on desktop environment, because that is also part of picking your best Linux distro, is also picking the right desktop environment that you're going to be comfortable with and you're going to enjoy using. And that's a whole nother ball of wax. And it's just as in-depth as just this part is. You have this part, and then you have a whole next section of desktop environment. What is the best desktop environment? There isn't one, and it is also the one you like the best. Same as this. So next video, we're going to get into desktop environments. So Ubuntu and any of Ubuntu derivatives. I'm also going to include right here, I'm going to also include OpenSUSE Leap. So, and the Ubuntu is now, okay, let me go back to the Ubuntu, because you also have to pick between Ubuntu LTS and Ubuntu standard release. And the difference there is that LTS releases every 2 years, is supported for 5 years. The standard release is released every 6 months and is supported for, I think, 8 months. So you have to pick between those two also. Here's an example, KDE 6. I'm on a rolling release called OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, and yes, I am going to recommend that. I'm on a rolling release called OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. I got KDE 6 about a month ago, approximately. A little bit more than that, I think. Kubuntu 22.04 just released. It does not have KDE 6. It still has KDE 5. And it is an LTS variety. If you use the LTS supported version of that and you don't take backports, you won't get KDE 6 for 2 more years. If you do Kubuntu 22.04 and you use the short-term version of it, you'll get the next version in 6 months. You will have the KDE 6 version of Kubuntu in 6 months, or 2 years, depending on which one you get. Or if you go with a rolling release, KDE 6 is already on rolling releases. So you have to pick between that. Rolling releases are good for gaming. That's it. So on your stable variety, Use Ubuntu long-term support if you're doing a server, if you're doing programming, data entry. Use a short-term support if you're doing some of that and you're also wanting to do gaming, and you won't be that far behind on the gaming stack. And it should work pretty reasonably well. OpenSUSE Leap, I think, is supported for a year. I'm not sure. It might be a year. I'm pretty sure it's supported for 2 years. Comes out every year, I think. Anyway, OpenSUSE Leap, kind of the same thing. It's got older packages. It's more geared more towards being servers, being data entries, being business oriented, that sort of thing. Okay, rolling releases. On your rolling release side, you have Arch. And I'm not picking these in any particular order, obviously, because if I was, it would be OpenSUSE Tumbleweed would be first. Exactly. And then we're going to have OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. And there is also a derivative of OpenSUSE Tumbleweed that is called Gecko Linux. Okay, so you have Arch and derivatives and OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. We could also throw in Gecko Linux into that. It's just OpenSUSE Tumbleweed with a simpler installer. I don't think OpenSUSE Tumbleweed has a hard installer. And I think Gecko Linux also has NVIDIA, has the NVIDIA and Codex repository already enabled, so you got a little bit of a benefit there. It's as simple as going into Yast, selecting those repos, boom, you're done. So I'm not sure that I haven't seen anything from Gecko that makes me go, wow, this is great. But by all means, try it. You might like it. Arch doesn't belong here. And I'll tell you why. So I'll explain why Arch doesn't belong there. It's because by default, they do not use secure boot. And I'm going to scoot this over a little bit, make my room in between because I still need this in between slot. Okay, so between. And the reason that we need this between is because you have a couple of categories that are in between the LTS and the rolling release. And you have a couple of distros that fall into this, and I'm going to put okay, now I've got a little bit more room. So between the LTS and the stable point release and the rolling release bleeding edge, you have a couple of things that are in between. So what's in between? Number one, I am going to do this in my order this time. I'm going to go OpenSUSE, slow roll. And I need you to understand and recognize that this is still kind of a work in progress. They're still having a few issues with this here and there, but they're getting them worked out. When what slow roll is, and I spelled that wrong, OpenSUSE slow roll. Now what slow roll is a slow roll is based on OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, and it just updates slower. It's not bleeding edge. The last thing that I saw on this was somebody suggested that the LTS kernel be used on the slow roll. I think that's a good idea because that's the whole point of slow roll is to not be the bleeding edge that Tumbleweed is. So you have OpenSUSE slow roll, and then I'm going to go ahead and put Fedora in here because Fedora does a point release. It's a semi-point release, semi-rolling release mix of sorts. I'm not sure, but we're going to put Fedora in the in-between. I'm personally not a big fan of it. I think they're a little bit too strict on their codecs and their NVIDIA drivers. A little too hard to install them. The last two times that I tried to install Fedora on this old potato back here running the NVIDIA card, I couldn't get the NVIDIA drivers to install, and it reboots successfully. So, and I followed the guides. I followed the Reddits and the guides, and I did everything, and put Tumbleweed, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed back on it, and it's running in just fine. It's perfect, beautiful, running NVIDIA drivers. There's the desktop. Running Wayland, NVIDIA drivers running Wayland, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. Running like a charm. Just an old potato. It's an AMD Quad Phenom 2. 12 gigs of RAM. It's running KDE, Wayland Session, NVIDIA drivers, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, running like a charm. They're absolute charm. With Fedora, I couldn't get the drivers to install. Now, I will give Fedora its credit when credit is due. Fedora, at this time, on this day, is the only one that sees my 2-in-1 laptop as a tablet in tablet mode. Don't know what's going on there. It's the only one. Only one. Saddens me. But kudos to Fedora for getting it right. I can't. But anyway, I think that's going to do it for this video. We're going to put down here desktop environments next. So that, because my next video is going to be all about the desktop environments. And you have to get the right desktop environment, just as important as getting the right distro itself. So, yeah, I mean, it's just as important. So my next video, subscribe and like and all that stuff if you want to be notified when I get my next video out, which will be desktop environments. I will show you how to install desktop environments, multiple desktop environments into one. I'll show you a website that shows you some different desktop environments. Pretty neat and cool, as long as it's working. It doesn't work all the time, so I'll try that. Show you that if I can. But I think I have pretty well covered all of it in this video. 30 minutes, it's not bad. Really. Honestly thought it's going to be longer. So desktop environments next. Stay tuned. And as always, thanks for watching.